routine traffic stop turns into a courtroom battle when a white cop falsely accuses a black woman. But she's no ordinary citizen. She's a high-ranking Navy SEAL. Watch as truth, power, and justice collide, revealing a story of courage and accountability that will leave you speechless.
The night air was thick with humidity as Maya Evans drove down the nearly empty road, her hands steady on the wheel. The city lights flickered in the distance, but she was focused on getting home after a long day. Dressed in simple athletic wear, she blended in with any other ordinary citizen. Nothing about her appearance suggested that she was one of the highest-ranking Navy SEALs in the country. To the world, she was just another black woman driving alone at night. A sudden flash of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror made her sigh. She quickly checked her speed. She was well within the limit. There was no reason for her to be pulled over. Still, she knew how these situations could go. As a woman who had seen war zones and high-pressure combat missions, Maya wasn't easily shaken. But this was different. She wasn't on enemy territory overseas. She was in her own country, facing a different kind of battlefield. She carefully pulled over to the side of the road, taking a deep breath before reaching for her glove compartment to retrieve her license and registration. Before she could grab them, a sharp tap on the window made her pause. She turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered white police officer staring down at her, his hand already resting on his holster. His name tag read, Turner. His posture was tense, his expression unreadable, but Maya recognized the look in his eyes. It was the look of a man who had already made up his mind about her. Rolling down her window, she kept her voice even. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" "You were driving a little fast back there," Turner said, his tone casual but laced with something more. "I was going the speed limit," she replied calmly, her hands resting visibly on the steering wheel. Turner's eyes flicked toward the passenger seat, scanning the interior of her car as if searching for something incriminating. License and registration. She nodded, moving slowly to retrieve them. She knew better than to make sudden movements. Years of discipline had trained her to remain composed in tense situations. But this wasn't combat. This was her life, and she had seen enough headlines to know how quickly things could escalate. As she handed him the documents, she noticed the way he eyed her ID, his brow furrowing. "Maya Evans," he muttered as if trying to place the name. Then he smirked. "Military, huh? What a desk job?" She didn't react to the insult. "Something like that," she said, keeping her tone neutral. Turner clicked his tongue, flipping through her paperwork before glancing back at her. "Step out of the vehicle." Maya blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Step out of the car." "May I ask why?" "Failure to comply will result in arrest," he said, his fingers tightening around his holster. Maya knew she had done nothing wrong. Every part of her training told her to stand her ground, but she also knew that reasoning with a man like this was pointless. Slowly, she unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door, stepping onto the pavement. Turner circled her like a predator assessing its prey. "You look a little too calm for someone getting arrested," he said, as if trying to provoke her. "I'm just following orders, officer," she replied, her face unreadable. "Hands behind your back," he ordered, pulling out his cuffs. Maya didn't resist as the cold metal snapped around her wrists. She had faced worse. This man had no idea who he was dealing with, but soon he would.
The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as people settled into their seats, the weight of the case hanging in the air. Maya sat at the defense table, her hands resting calmly in her lap, her face unreadable. Across from her, Officer Jake Turner sat with his arms crossed, exuding confidence. He had done this before, stood in a courtroom, spun a story, and walked away without consequences. To him, this was routine. Another day, another defendant, another conviction. The judge, an older man with sharp eyes, entered, and the room fell silent. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced, his voice firm. The prosecutor, a young, eager man with neatly combed hair, stood and approached the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, today you will hear the testimony of a dedicated police officer, a man who puts his life on the line every day to protect our streets," the prosecutor began, nodding toward Turner. "You will hear how he was forced to subdue a dangerous, uncooperative suspect who resisted arrest. You will see the evidence, the reports, and by the end of today, you will understand why the defendant must be held accountable." Maya remained still, showing no reaction. She had heard men like this before, men who shaped words into weapons, twisting the truth to fit their narrative. She wasn't worried. She was simply waiting. Turner was called to the stand, adjusting his uniform as he walked with confidence. He took his oath and sat down, facing the jury with a practiced expression of sincerity. Officer Turner, can you tell us what happened on the night of the arrest? The prosecutor asked. Turner nodded, his voice steady. I was on patrol when I noticed a vehicle speeding down the road. I initiated a stop. When I approached the driver, she was immediately aggressive and uncooperative. She refused to comply with my orders, and when I asked her to step out of the vehicle, she resisted. Resisted how? The prosecutor pressed. Turner sighed as if recalling a difficult memory. She tensed up, refused to put her hands behind her back, and attempted to pull away. At that point, I had no choice but to restrain her for my own safety. The prosecutor nodded, turning to the jury. No choice but to restrain her, because when an officer's safety is at risk, he must act swiftly. Thank you, Officer Turner. Maya's attorney, a composed woman in a sharp navy suit, stood up. Officer Turner, do you always patrol that area? Turner hesitated for a second. Occasionally. Yet, in your report, you stated you were running a routine patrol in a different part of town that night. So which is it? A flicker of irritation crossed Turner's face. Sometimes shift my route. Maya's attorney nodded as if she expected that answer. Let's talk about the body cam footage. Oh, wait, there is none. Why is that? Turner shifted in his seat. The camera malfunctioned. How convenient, she replied. Officer Turner, are you certain the defendant resisted? Absolutely, he said firmly. Maya finally looked up, her expression calm. She could see the small cracks forming in Turner's confidence. He had no idea what was coming. The courtroom fell silent as Maya stood up and walked toward the witness stand. She moved with a quiet confidence that made even the most skeptical jurors take notice. Her attorney gestured for her to take a seat, and as she did, she folded her hands neatly in front of her. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room, but she remained unfazed. This wasn't the first time she had been in a high-pressure situation, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. The judge turned to her. State your full name for the record. Commander Maya Evans, she said, her voice steady and clear. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even Turner's smug expression faltered for a brief second, but he quickly recovered, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed. The prosecutor frowned. Commander, you hold a military rank? Yes. What branch? The United States Navy. The prosecutor hesitated. And your role in the Navy? Maya met his gaze. I am an active-duty Navy SEAL. Gasps echoed in the courtroom. The jury exchanged glances, and even the judge seemed to shift slightly in his seat. Turner's posture stiffened, his fingers twitching against the table. He had arrested a Navy SEAL. He had lied under oath about a woman who had completed some of the most grueling military training in existence. The defense attorney let the moment sink in before speaking. Commander Evans, can you tell us about the night in question? Maya nodded. I was driving home when I saw flashing lights behind me. I pulled over immediately. I knew I had done nothing wrong, so I waited calmly for the officer to approach. Did you resist arrest? No. Did you ever threaten Officer Turner? No. Did you comply with all of his orders? Yes. Her attorney turned toward the judge. Your Honor, I would like to submit key evidence into the record. She gestured toward the bailiff, who handed her a small device. She held it up for the courtroom to see. This is Commander Evans's personal body camera. As a Navy SEAL, she follows strict documentation protocols in her civilian life. She recorded the entire encounter. The prosecutor's face drained of color. Turner shot forward in his seat. That's not admissible. How do we know it hasn't been tampered with? The judge held up a hand to silence him. I'll allow it. The attorney pressed play. The footage played on the screen for everyone to see. Turner's voice rang out, ordering Maya to step out of the car without reason. The video showed her complying calmly, never raising her voice, never making a threatening move. Then came the most damning part, Turner twisting her arm aggressively and slamming the cuffs on, even as she stood perfectly still. His fabricated story crumbled in real time. The courtroom erupted into whispers. Turner's face went pale. He had been caught, and there was no way out. The courtroom was silent for a moment as the last frame of the video froze on the screen. Then the murmurs started, low, incredulous whispers rippling through the spectators like a wave. The jury members exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from uncertainty to realization. The judge leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing as he turned his attention to Officer Turner. The once confident officer sat stiffly in his seat, his face pale, his hands gripping the arms of his chair as if bracing for impact. Maya remained composed. She had seen this kind of reckoning before, not in a courtroom, but on the battlefield, when an enemy realized they had made a fatal miscalculation. The difference was that Turner had done this to himself. He had walked into this courtroom expecting to win, never imagining that the woman he tried to paint as a criminal was not only innocent, but far more powerful than he could have ever guessed. Her attorney turned toward the judge. Your Honor, this evidence speaks for itself. Officer Turner lied under oath. He falsely accused my client, fabricated a report, and abused his authority. I move for an immediate dismissal of all charges against Commander Evans and request that Officer Turner be held accountable for his perjury. The prosecutor, who had been so confident at the beginning of the trial, was now visibly uncomfortable. He shifted his papers around as if searching for a way to salvage the case. Finally, he stood up, adjusting his tie. Your Honor, given this new evidence, the prosecution withdraws all charges against Commander Evans. The judge nodded sharply. Commander Evans, you are free to go. This court owes you an apology. He turned his attention to Turner, his gaze turning cold. Officer Turner, you have been found to have given false testimony under oath. Perjury is a serious offense, especially from a law enforcement officer. Additionally, this video raises serious concerns about your conduct. Turner shot to his feet. Your Honor, I. Sit down, the judge ordered. His voice was calm, but the authority in it left no room for argument. Turner hesitated, then slowly sank back into his chair. The judge turned to the prosecutor. I suggest that the district attorney's office review this case immediately. It appears Officer Turner may be guilty of criminal misconduct. Maya didn't need to see the look on Turner's face to know that reality was finally hitting him. The power dynamic had shifted. He had walked into this courtroom believing that he held all the cards, but now he was the one being judged. The bailiff stepped forward, standing near Turner as a silent warning. The judge sighed, rubbing his temples before speaking again. This court will reconvene for further proceedings regarding Officer Turner's actions. Until then, this case is dismissed. The gavel struck the desk. It was over. Maya stood smoothing out the front of her blazer as her attorney whispered a quiet, "Well done." But Maya wasn't celebrating. This wasn't a victory. It was justice, and it was long overdue. The cameras flashed the moment Maya stepped out of the courthouse. Reporters swarmed the steps, microphones extended, voices overlapping as they shouted questions. The world had been watching, and now they wanted to hear from the woman at the center of it all. She paused, letting the noise settle before she spoke. I appreciate your questions, she said, her voice steady, commanding respect without needing to demand it. But let's be clear about what happened here today. This isn't just about me. It's about accountability. It's about the truth. A reporter stepped forward. Commander Evans, when did you know Officer Turner was lying? Maya looked at the reporter, her expression calm. From the moment he asked me to step out of my car without cause. She let that statement sink in. See, I've operated in war zones. I've led missions where lives were on the line. I know what real threats look like. I know what real criminals look like. And I know when someone is abusing their power. Another reporter raised a microphone. Did you ever feel afraid? Maya considered the question. Afraid? No. But I was aware that without proof, my truth wouldn't matter. Aware that in situations like these, perception can outweigh reality. That's why I stayed calm. That's why I recorded everything. She glanced at the crowd, and that's why we're standing here today, talking about justice instead of another wrongful conviction. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. People were nodding, some murmuring in agreement. The case had ignited conversations across the country. Maya had become a symbol, not just of resilience, but of the quiet power of knowing your worth, knowing your rights, and refusing to be intimidated. A voice from the side cut through the noise. What do you say to those who claim this was just a misunderstanding? Maya turned toward the question, her gaze sharp. A misunderstanding? She let out a small breath, shaking her head. A misunderstanding is when someone misreads a text message. A misunderstanding is when you accidentally take the wrong turn. But what happened to me? That was intentional. That was systemic. That was a man who thought he could manipulate the truth because he assumed I had no power. He thought I was just another person who wouldn't fight back. She met the eyes of the reporter. He was wrong. A hush settled over the crowd. Maya wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for everyone who had ever been in her position, for those who didn't have a voice, for those who never got their day in court. Another reporter leaned in. "What's next for you, Commander Evans?" Maya let a small smile touch her lips. "I go back to doing what I've always done, serving, leading, and standing for what's right. But I hope this case serves as a reminder. Never assume someone's worth based on what you think you see, and never think the truth won't come to light." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving the world to remember her name. The sun was beginning to set as Maya walked through the quiet streets, away from the courthouse and the chaos of reporters. The weight of the past few days lingered, but not as a burden, more like a reminder. A lesson learned, not just for her, but for everyone who had been watching. She took a deep breath, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease. She had faced enemies before, but this battle had been different. There were no weapons, no war zones, no camouflage, only truth against lies, power against justice. And in the end, the truth had won. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. When she pulled it out, she saw a flood of messages. Friends, fellow officers, people from her past and present, all reaching out. Some were congratulating her, some were apologizing, forever doubting her, and others were simply thanking her. Messages from strangers poured in too. People who had been in similar situations, people who never got their chance to fight back, people who saw themselves in her and now felt seen. She scrolled through the texts until one caught her eye. It was from an unknown number. "You don't know me, but I wanted to say thank you. You stood up when so many of us couldn't. You gave us hope." Maya stared at the message for a long time. She had never set out to be anyone's symbol. She hadn't fought this battle for attention or fame. She had done it because it was right. But if her story helped even one person find the strength to stand up for themselves, then maybe this fight had been bigger than just her. A familiar voice called her name. She turned to see her mentor, Admiral James Carter, standing by his car. The older man had been a guiding force in her life since she first joined the SEALs. His presence was a reminder of the discipline and integrity that had shaped her into the woman she was today. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, stepping closer. "How are you holding up?" Maya gave him a small smile. "I'm good. Just processing everything." He nodded, studying her. "You handled yourself well in there. You didn't just win, you proved a point." She exhaled, looking down the road. "I just wanted the truth to come out." "And it did," he said. "But now you've got something even more important, a voice people are listening to. What are you going to do with it?" Maya thought about that for a moment. She had spent her life serving her country, protecting people in the shadows. Maybe now it was time to step into the light, to fight a different kind of battle, the battle for truth, for accountability, for justice. "I guess we'll see," she said finally. Admiral Carter smiled. "I have a feeling this is just the beginning for you." Maya watched as he walked back to his car. As she turned to leave, she felt lighter, stronger. She had fought and won, not just for herself, but for everyone who needed to believe that justice was still possible. With the city stretched out before her, Maya walked forward, ready for whatever came next.